Welcome to Capitol Hill. Well, the opposition leader Tony Abbott's been talking about asylum seekers and how to combat people smuggling in the wake of the High Court's decision. He's had a briefing from senior bureaucrats on what the implications of that High Court decision are. Over in New Zealand at the Pacific Islands Forum, Julia Gillard isn't talking about the matter in her discussions with Pacific Island leaders. She sat next to or near the President of Nauru twice at dinner and lunch, but the two have been discussing football. Back at home, the government had some good news, with the economy growing in the June quarter. Joining me to discuss the day's events are Labor MP Michelle Rowland and Liberal MP Kelly O'Dwyer. Welcome to you both.
Hi, Lyndall.
G'day. Michelle, the June quarter national accounts figures show the economy grew strongly in the quarter, and for the year the economy's still growing. That's good news, but do you think the Cabinet Ministers are selling that good news as well as they can?
Look, it is a promising set of figures, Lyndall. I mean, growth of 1.2% while the rest of the world is basically imploding when it comes to their economic status. It bodes very well for Australia to understand that we have very sound fundamentals. The building blocks of our economy are good. And of course, we operate in a global economy. When we compare ourselves to the rest of the world, we can see that we are getting things right. I think that one thing we have to bear in mind is that we are coming out of a period of sustained natural disaster as well. And when we look at the recovery that's being made specifically in Queensland, you look at Queensland leading the way in terms of that recovery, you can understand why our investments in infrastructure, in rebuilding that state, have made very good sense. So I do believe people actually do understand in the community, because they turn on their TVs, they see what's happening in the rest of the world, they see unemployment rates of 20% plus around Europe. Every morning they wake up to see the stock exchange in the US having another bad day. Meanwhile, our dollar continues to rise, demonstrating the effect of our economy. So I think the Australian community does realise that. It's a set of figures that bodes very well for the future. We do have a lot of challenges in the global environment, but that's the position we're finding ourselves in.
Kelly, the economy's growing. There are some signs that consumers are becoming less cautious, which may be good news for the retail industry. In the quarter, manufacturing went up, productivity went up. Surely you have to give the government some credit for creating these economic conditions.
Well, this is one set of figures, and surely these set of figures are a lot better than last national accounts. However, the point that I would make is that we have seen a 5.4% increase in our terms of trade. We already have historic highs in our terms of trade, 140-year historic terms of trade highs. This has increased yet again. There can be no excuses now for this government to continue to deliver deficits and increased debt, and yet this is what they are continuing to do. They're continuing to rack up spending on the government's credit card here, and that's what we say. We say that the government needs to control its spending, it needs to control deficits and debt. The historic terms of trade are such that it should be able to deliver this, but we know that this is not a government that can deliver anything other than deficits. Wayne Swan has delivered 4 deficits in the last 4 budgets. We know that he's not on track to deliver anything other than a deficit next time round. The government needs to take responsibility for its fiscal management of our economy. It can't look to any more excuses. They're absolutely out of excuses now. So it needs to be able to deliver, as Julia Gillard said she would. It needs to be a year of decision and delivery, but it's really been a year marked by deceit and debacle.
Michelle, it's critical, isn't it, that the government delivers on the surplus promise, delivers a return to surplus next year to combat the sorts of things Kelly's been saying?
Oh, the government's reiterated this on many occasions, Lyndall, our commitment to making sure we deliver on that promise. We have to also bear in mind that in these global circumstances we are faring particularly well, and I will let the government's record speak for itself. You look at the rest of the world coming out of global financial crisis Mark 1. Which country is the standout? Australia. Which country is the standout today, even when GFC Mark 2 has been around the corner and we've had the worst recession, worst global financial situation in 50 years? It's the Australian government. So our record speaks for itself when it comes to fiscal management. There are challenges that we need to face in our economy, and I'll name three of them. Firstly, in terms of increasing productivity, it always needs to be improved, but we don't do that at the expense of workers. We do that by looking at innovative ways, and the most innovative way to do that, and as the statistics will attest, the way that you do that most of all is through ICT investment. That's why we are making the biggest investment in ICT through investment in the national broadband network. We need to also recognise the challenge of the high dollar. It not only affects our exports, but it affects the services that we export as well, in terms of education, in terms of legal services, even all the services that we export, and tourism as well. And we can see that with the tourism, international tourist rates being down. And the other thing we need to ensure, of course, is that we always bear in mind we are living in a patchwork economy. We need to make sure that the benefits of the resources boom are spread equally across our economy.
Kelly, the coalition
Can I just respond very quickly to what Michelle just said then? Because I think it's important to note that, the government's very quick to try and claim credit for past achievements. The reason Australia has performed better relative to the rest of the world is because of the position that this government inherited. It inherited zero net debt. It had a surplus. It had $60 billion in the future fund. So this government, while it might like to claim credit for that, was not behind any of the difficult decisions required in order to put the government in that position. The second point I'd make in relation to Michelle's comment regarding the patchwork economy and the serious global challenges that we do face with the high Australian dollar is why in this environment would the government seek to introduce a carbon tax that will put our economy at a disadvantage? Why would it put Australian jobs at risk in this sort of current patchwork economy when we know that the rest of the world is not imposing an economy-wide carbon tax? The government has serious questions to answer in relation to this, and yet it still cannot give a sensible response as to why it seeks to introduce this huge economy-wide change that would actually hurt Australian jobs and hurt Australian exports.
Well, we've answered that, Lyndall. We've answered that on many occasions, and the fact is that the rest of the world is moving, and Australia should not be left behind. Should not be left behind. And in terms of claiming credit for past achievements, I don't think it was a coalition government that got us through the last global financial crisis with a fiscal stimulus package, which the coalition voted against, by the way.
If I could just move on, because I'm sure we could talk about the economy all day, but to the issue of asylum seekers, Kelly, the opposition leader Tony Abbott offered cooperation to help the government change the Migration Act if that's what was needed to put offshore processing back in the mix. He appears to be narrowing that, saying Malaysia's not a goer and he wants changes that would allow processing on Nauru and Manus Island. If you're going to offer cooperation, shouldn't you offer the cooperation for the changes to be made which would allow any offshore processing and let the government stand or fall if it goes for the Malaysia option?
Well, we seek to make a positive contribution here. We have had a very consistent policy in relation to offshore processing. Right from the outset, we said that the Malaysian so-called solution put forward by a panicked Gillard government was the wrong solution to this particular problem. We knew it was wrong from the start. We said so. We've been consistent throughout. And we have said right from the outset that the best way to resolve this issue with respect to border protection in Australia is to return to the Howard government's policies of offshore detention in both Nauru and Manus Island and the reintroduction of temporary protection visas. Now, we have said that we are prepared to cooperate with the government to ensure that there is no legal question mark as to the viability of offshore processing. The opposition leader has been very clear in relation to that. We seek to assist the government. This has been a debacle from start to finish, from the East Timor solution through to the supposed regional solution that Julia Gillard said she was going to come up with in conjunction with all of our neighbours here, to now the Malaysian solution, which has fallen flat on its face. Julia Gillard is in the perfect position right now at the Pacific Forum to talk to our neighbours in Nauru and also in Papua New Guinea about what options might be available. She is refusing to do this. This is a real test of her leadership. Perhaps she's waiting for Kevin Rudd to get back to work as Foreign Minister so he can do that job for her, or maybe she's just waiting for Kevin Rudd.
Michelle, if the cooperation the opposition offers you is limited to Nauru and Manus Island, don't you have to accept that because you'll need their numbers to pass any changes to the Migration Act? And in the end, could it help save you from going forward with the Malaysian processing, because that could be problematic in the long term?
Lyndall, the reality is that offshore processing in and of itself does not do anything to solve the problem of people smuggling. Whatever decision Cabinet makes going forward on this will be guided by three principles. Firstly, there must ensure consistency with our international obligations. Secondly, there must be consistency with the law as it stands, and the law as it stands is what the High Court delivered last Wednesday. And thirdly, we want to make sure none of your viewers should be in any doubt our resolve to break the people smugglers' business model. Now, there is no doubt that offshore processing in and of itself does not do anything to deter women, children and vulnerable people from getting on boats and making that dangerous journey to Australia. We cannot have a situation where that is allowed to continue without any disincentives. Mr Abbott is very big on talking about what the Prime Minister should do. She should pick up the phone. She should reintroduce temporary protection visas. Well, here's something. Instead of telling people what they should do, he should listen to the immigration officials and the personnel who are going to give him this briefing and will continue to brief him as much as he needs to understand the law as it stands. It would be good for him to understand the law as it stands. And on the point of temporary protection visas, when we talk about vulnerable people, we talk about women and children in particular. And we look at the statistics. When TPVs were introduced, the number of arrivals by women and children actually increased because there was no family reunion element under it. So I don't want a situation where not only do we provide no disincentive for people to get on boats and make that dangerous journey, I don't want an incentive for people to actually get on that boat and make that journey.
I think, Michelle, I mean, you're talking about the facts. The facts are these, that since the government changed position in August of 2008, over 12,000 people have arrived by boat. Over 240 boats have arrived in Australia. This has led to an absolute crisis in our detention networks here onshore. We certainly know that during the Howard government, our policies worked. They did deter the people smuggling network. They proved to be effective. And it is the government's arrogance and Julia Gillard's vanity that is preventing her from accepting the consistent advice that she has received, not only from those immigration officials, but also from the High Court. The Chief Justice was very strong in this, and he was attacked for the advice that he provided in the most recent ruling. She needs to listen to the advice that she has been provided with and the advice that we have also tried to give her in good faith to ensure that we can have an effective border protection policy here in Australia.
Well, the advice that needs to be taken, Lyndall, by those in the opposition is that offshore processing is not beyond legal risk. Is not beyond legal risk, and we cannot have a situation. We cannot have. Look, you should help yourself by listening to what the advice actually is and by understanding the facts. The facts are these. Firstly, offshore processing ain't no silver bullet. Temporary protection visas do not stop women and children getting on boats. They are the facts.
And that's where we'll have to leave it. Michelle Rowland and Kelly O'Dwyer, thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks, Lyndall. Thanks, Michelle.
And thank you for joining Capitol Hill. Join us at the same time tomorrow.